Welcome to Programming with Professor Caliph. Today I want to talk about arrays and using them with for loops, which go really, really well since arrays are an indexed, ordered collection. So for loops, since they are counting, really go through the array in order very nicely for us. Then I also want to talk about using functions with arrays, how we can pass array parameters to functions and what that looks like. So here I am in VS Code with a project array experiments and a file array practice.java and a main set up for us. So to start with, let's make a couple of array variables. So I'm going to make both of these just simple integer arrays. And I'm going to just call them array 1 and array 2 because I don't really have any particular purpose for them except demonstration. The first one we're going to go ahead and set up by using the curly braces. So let's get some values in here, 17, 14. So that gives us a bit of an array to work with that already has values. This array is going to have 7 elements, so they're going to run from index 0 to index 6. Then let's set up an array that we do without providing values initially. So we're going to do this using new int, the type, and then the square brackets with this size in it. So we'll make that a 20 item array. So now I would like to make a function. And part of the reason we're going to make a function here is just to separate out some of the work. So let's start by making a function that just prints an array. Now this function I'm going to make public. I'm also going to make it static because we really don't have object variables and so forth. We don't want to make objects here. We're just working with these items. And so this is one of the uses of our static methods, is when we're just writing something that works on its parameters, as this will. What I'm doing here is printing out the contents of an integer array. So we'll make that a void function. And then let's call it print array. And it's going to take one parameter, which will be the array to print. So here we're going to use a for loop, but we're going to use a slightly different kind of for loop than what we're used to seeing, because we're going to print the whole array no matter what. We're going to use a kind of for loop that instead of counting is going to go through each item and do something with each item. So the idea here is that this last thing must be a collection of items. An array is one of the options that works fine there. And then before this colon, we're going to have the type of the items in the array and then a name to use for each item as we go. Notice that this is exactly the same as if I had simply, well, we will look at this code both ways. Let me finish writing this version. So system.out.println item. So that will go through and print each item from the array. So let's actually try out using this with array 1. So I'm going to say print array. I could say array practice.print array, but I don't have to because I'm in the array practice class. And then we'll pass it the parameter we want the array to print out. And let's see what happens when we actually run that. So we see that we get values that match the values in the array. So that's good. So let me quickly just show you. Let's comment this code out briefly. Let's comment it out. So we can easily do that with either toggle line comments or add line comment. And let's write this with the more traditional counting for loop. So that would simply be int I is 0, I is less than array arr to print dot length, and then I plus plus. Then inside, we need to print, so I'm going to use the sysout to get the print line, and then we're simply going to say arr to print at I. So then let's go ahead and run our program again and drag this up, and we'll see that we get exactly these same results. These two for loops are identical in their results here. But when we have a collection of items and we're planning to go through the whole thing, this approach is just a little shorter and more convenient. The actual accounting for loop is more explicit and more flexible because we can use it for other kinds of situations as well. Okay, whichever way we do it, we've successfully printed our array. Let's go ahead and also print the other array. So let me sys out just to get a blank line, and then call print array with array2. Apparently it thought that was the one I wanted to print. So let's run that. And we're going to see here that when we create an array and we haven't given it values yet, it's actually going to have all zeros. This is because an array is a kind of object, and Java by default initializes all of the instance variables in an object to their 0 value if we don't give them a value. So array2 has all zeros. Okay, now I want to look at actually reading some items into an array. So let's see if we can fill up, maybe not fill all the way, but fill at least part of this array2 value. So I'm going to start by keeping track of the number of meaningful values I have in array2. So I have 20 items in array2, but right now all 20 of them are not of interest. They're just the default zeros. I haven't actually put values into them. It's very common with an array for us to use just part of the array to keep track of items and have just the rest of the array be space where we can put more items if we have them. When we do that, we need to have some sort of variable that's keeping track of what are the actual valid or meaningful values in our array. So to do that, we're going to have an int num values, which will start at 0, because so far we have put no values into the array. Then I'm not sure how many values I want to put in. I'm just going to put them in until I decide to stop. So this is a good example for a sentinel controlled loop. So let's do system.out.print. We want to use print because that ends up with better looking user interface than if we use print line. And then I'm going to say put in a negative to quit. So we're going to only take positive values here, or non-negative ones at least. Then I need to read a value. So that means I'm going to need a scanner. So let's pop up here real quick and set up a scanner for ourselves. And I'm going to go ahead and call that keyboard new scanner. We're reading from standard input, the keyboard, so we'll call that system.in. Come up here and import java.util.scanner. Not sure why it didn't want to do that for us, as it often does, but we can do it ourselves. So then we're going to call it keyboard.nextInt to get our value. So that gives us our initial value. Now we're going to sentinel controlled loop. So we'll have our standard check to make sure we don't have the sentinel. So in this case, that would be greater than or equal to 0 or greater than -1. But then I also want to make sure I don't try to overfill my array. Because if I try to put too many values in my array, then I'm going to get an exception and break my program because I tried to write into a part of the array that doesn't exist. So num values is less than array2.length will guarantee that I only continue as long as I both still have a positive value and have room in the array for the item. So now I need to, if I get into the while loop, I have a valid value, I have room for it, and so I need to put it in the array. So we're going to say array2 at num values, which is keeping track of how many values we've read so far. So the next value we read will go at that index. We have 0 values. We have no values yet. The value we read needs to go in the first index, index 0. We have 1 value so far. We need to put it in index 1, the second index, and so on. So that works out to be very convenient. Num values is keeping track of both how many values we already have and the location where the next value goes. So we've put it in there. Now, of course, we have another value in the array, so we need to increase num values. And then finally, we need to get our next item. So we're going to just copy and paste our read from above and get rid of the declaration piece of that because we certainly aren't declaring a new value. And then we can actually check to see, did this work well? So let's go ahead and add a call to the print with array2, which is what it wanted to print. Get rid of the extra semicolon and see what that result is. So let's run this. We're missing a couple of semicolons that I just didn't notice the red little squiggles. So let's try that again with our semicolons. Okay, still have a problem. So let's see what our problem is. Run. Okay, it was just having issues because of the previous time. Needed to finish off the process before I tried to run again. So let's start entering some values. Let's see, make sure we're in the right window. Why don't we do 5, 10, 15, 20, 7, 3, -2. Okay, so now when we look at the result of our printing, we see that 5, 10, 15, 20, 7, and 3 are all in our array now. And then we don't have the rest of them. Let's also add a sysout number of values in array2 is num values, just so we see how many values we think are valid values here. So let's go ahead and run that again. And we'll do the same kind of thing, 10, 15, 20, actually do 25, 7, 3, that's good, -2. So that should be 7 values that we have, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 before the zeros start, and our number of values is 7. And just because it's bothering me, we're going to go add that S in. Let's do something a little bit different. So we've printed out the array, we've read values into an array. Now what I want to do is actually add up the values in the array. By the way, I hope you're seeing the value of having created this little function. As we go and print the arrays, we can do that many times, and we're always using the same little function. We don't have to rewrite that code. It's part of the beauty of having functions or methods. Okay, so the next method I want to write is something to add up values from an array. But this time I'm going to make sure that I only add up the things that are important, the ones that are meaningful values. So we're going to say public static int, because we're going to return that sum that we've created. Sum array values. Of course, we need an integer array here. And then we're also going to pass in a parameter that's very common when we're dealing with arrays that are not necessarily filled up with valid values. And that's the number of elements in the array. So that's talking about how many elements of this array are we actually wanting to work with. So when we are dealing with array 2 here, we're going to want this value to be num values. When we're dealing with array 1, we can just pass it the length. And we'll see that in a minute. Okay, so how do we add things up? Well, adding up the contents of an array is going to be pretty straightforward. Like any other summing loop, we're going to start by setting up our sum variable or total. Make sure it's set to 0 since we're adding things up. Then we're going to have a for loop to go through the part of the array that is relevant. So the part of the array that is where the items are. So I is 0 because we are going from the beginning of the array, but then I is less than num elements because we don't want to go through all of the array, only the first num items in the array. And then we'll do what we usually do with sums, add the new value that we're looking at to what we have so far. And then finally, we do want to give this value back. We have this function. Its purpose is to add up all the values and give back the result. So we need to return sum. As a quick sort of reminder, I haven't been doing much with Javadoc, but I'm going to go ahead and write the Javadoc for this real quickly. Add up the first num elements items in an integer array. So the integer array, the array, it doesn't really to sum the number of valid elements in the array, and then we're going to return the sum of the valid elements in the array. So just a reminder, this is what we look like, what we are looking for when we're looking for Javadoc comments on our public methods. Okay, now let's try using this. I'm going to go ahead and throw in an extra print line here. Give us a little space. Then I want to actually see what it looks like to add up these arrays. So system.out.println. We're going to go ahead and give our, well, we already have a blank line. We don't need that. The sum is plus sum array values. Did I really call that array value instead of array values? Yes, I did. Let's go fix that. And we'll pass it array2 and num values. Now the result here would be the same whether we go through the whole array or not in this case, because all the extra values are 0. There are actually situations where we might not have the rest of the values being 0. And no matter what, this saves time. It's more efficient to go through just the part of the array that we care about. So let's go ahead and run that. And we need to put in some values. So let's say 10, 20, 30, 40, minus 2. So that should add up to 100. And we see that in fact it is 100, and we will put in our space here. Then I actually want to show that if we want to use this and sum the whole array, we could use this with -1, and to get all of the things in the array, we're simply going to use array1.length. And let's go ahead and throw in an extra new line here to get this blank line between these, and go ahead and run that. Oh, we still have to put in our values, 40, 50, -1. So number of values was 5. Their sum should be 150 and is. And if we go take a look, we should see that the values in array 1, so that's 30, 35, 47, 60, 77, 87, 91. So in fact, that is the correct sum. So I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like to be working with our arrays, how for loops work with them, and also how we can use these methods, static or not, to get some of this work done and allow us to do the same thing with different arrays, because we're passing different arrays to these parameters and only write the code once. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you next time.